If you struggle with figuring out what to charge, and maybe you realize I need to charge more money, but I'm not sure what to charge, this episode is for you. We're going to go over just some general considerations of trying to figure out what you should charge, and also give you a good frame of reference for things to consider when trying to figure out your pricing strategy for different types of offerings.
Welcome back to the Jesus Coffee Yoga Podcast. If this is your first time, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. What we do here is we get to sit down, have conversations with teachers and leaders in the fitness and yoga space, just like you, about yoga, about business. We like to drink some coffee, and of course, we like to talk about Jesus.
So if that's you, why don't you grab a coffee or some kind of tasty beverage and pull up a chair, and let's chat about how to price your offerings.
Speaking of tasty beverage, what are you sipping on today?
Well, this is actually my second cup of coffee. My first one was some kind of Ethiopian bean. This one, I had to grab the bag because it doesn't say a location unless one of these is a location that I'm unaware of. Burundi, Ubuto, Karutzi.
Where do you get it at your local coffee shop?
Yeah, Nordagio's is a place here in town where I go get it. It's a washed processed bourbon with green apple, lime, and cacao.
That sounds
How do you say
amazing.
cocoa?
Cacao, like cocoa.
You know, if you're wondering, because there are people out there that read those and you're like, green apple? Like lime? Like, how do you taste that? The coffee doesn't taste like that. I would say that there are some people, I'm not one of those. There are some people, like a wine, what do you call those? Sommelier or whatever, that they can literally taste a wine and tell you the make, like they can tell you the vineyard, they can tell you the year, which is just crazy to me. Some people have such a developed palate that they can taste that. I'm not one of those.
I remember, like when I went to Costa Rica, I remember it tasted like chocolate and fruit together. And I was like, this does not taste like my Folgers at home, which I don't drink Folgers, but you know what I mean? Like you could tell.
Yeah, and there definitely are levels. Like when you've had one, so your experience, when you've had one that is at that level, you might not taste the lime in that one, but you can tell like this is just different. And like there are some flavors where I'm like, yeah, I can kind of taste the hint of whatever. But if you just gave it to me, I wouldn't be like, oh, there's a hint of blueberry and caramel. Like, I don't know.
I love that though. Like I love coffee and I drink it very rarely, but I love the flavor of coffee so much. I'm drinking tea. Actually, I have like my little setup here. I got this at my local coffee shop called Simply Ground here in my town, and it came with these little tiny teacups. And I'm drinking, I can't remember, it's just a black tea, but for those of you that love oils, it has bergamot and vanilla undertone, and it's delicious. And I just put my cream and honey in there. So that's my caffeine shot for the day because coffee makes me crawl out of my skin. So, all right, let's talk about the money. This is a subject, it's actually our part, 3 of this series that we've done. I mean, didn't mean for it to be a series, but kind of just like, this is something you're really passionate about. And I think you have a set of lenses that helps people like me and people probably like everyone that's listening in this space that just have a harder time sometimes seeing these the way you do. And so I think that it's been awesome to go through this. So we talked about like the mindset, we talked about different offerings to make money. And then now we're going to actually go through and like talk about like what it looks like to actually price your classes. So again, whether you're new and just getting started, or you've been teaching for 10 years and you're like, I need to make more money, which is okay. It's okay if you need to make more money. I think that this I hope it's going to help a lot of people.
So first, I just want to start this off with just some overall considerations and things for people to think about in the first section of this episode. And then the second half, we'll just go through some of the offerings and just some considerations for you as you're trying to figure out like what to charge for these different types of offerings. One concept that I want to discuss that's really important when it comes to any kind of pricing anywhere is this concept of anchoring. And whether you're negotiating, like buying something on Facebook Marketplace, or you're buying a house, or just in any kind of situation where someone is evaluating whether they want to buy something or not, actually there's 2 components to this. There's one, the anchor price is really important, and also having something to compare to, which that's part of anchoring as well. Some things it's really helpful to have 2 different prices, because when there's only one price, the thing in your mind or what's going on in their heads is, should I buy this or should I not buy this? When there's 2 options, it's a subtle shift from should I buy or not to which one should I buy? With anchoring in particular, what's really helpful is to have some kind of frame of reference to compare your price to like kind of like a normal or what other options might be. Now, this could be other options within what you have to offer, which is the better kind. So you're not like, oh, the studio over there charges this and I charge this. Now they're comparing you to the other studio and like, oh, maybe I'll go to them. When possible, it's better to anchor against your other things. So practically speaking, what does that look like for yoga? Having your drop-in rate, and we'll get into specifics here in a minute, but just having a drop-in rate that's higher than maybe some of your other offerings, so that when you have either like a punch card or a membership or a series or a pop, just whatever, there's some kind of frame of reference for normally a drop-in is this, but when you buy this, you're getting classes for this much. So there's an immediate comparison. Oh, normally a drop-in's $15, but if I do this, I'm going to get classes for $10 a class. So it gives a great way to do a comparison. And in your messaging and marketing, when you're putting stuff out there, you can put that comparison in there that, hey, normally drop-ins are this, so this gives you this much per class, or you can just put like, this saves you X amount per whatever compared to just drop-ins. So anchoring is really important. Another place you'll see this come in is if you have, let's say you're doing a retreat and you have multiple options, which usually it's just kind of like come to the retreat or not. But if, let's say, you had a space where some of the rooms might be sleeping with other people in the same room, or if you want to buy your own room, that could be at a higher rate. I've seen that where some people offer that, like, hey, there's 2 beds in this room, and if you are not okay with sharing a room with a stranger, or you can't bring a friend with you, then if you want to pay for the whole room, it's this much.
I have not done that for my retreats yet, but it's something I am considering doing. But it's a great example of like the retreat is this much. I need to make this much per student or per person. And then you start to build around it. So how do I do that without shooting myself in the foot? Like by selling 1 bed, but could normally get 2 people.
Or another example could be an early bird registration versus full price. I mean, that's anchoring too, because they're seeing full price is this, but if I sign up before this date, I can get it for this. So it's just always helpful to have a frame of reference so that when if they only see one price, it's always expensive, right? If someone just says, hey, this purse is $500 and you have no frame of reference for like, how much do other purses cost? And what is the intricacies of this purse? Like $500 that's just a lot of money. But when you hear, hey, this purse normally retails for $1,200 and you can get it for this, now you have a frame of reference. Oh, okay, this is a good deal because normally it's this. Or, hey, other purses with this kind of quality and condition are normally $500. This one is $300. Like it just gives you a frame of reference. Now $300 doesn't sound like a lot, but by itself, $300 is still a lot of money. So if you have no frame of reference, there's no way for them to know if they're getting a good deal or not.
Yeah. So some examples that I'll share personally, and then just as a consumer, how this looked. Yesterday, I'm getting one of those walking pads and one of the standing desks so that I can stand and do this from here on out. I was looking at them and I kind of knew in my mind how much I wanted to spend. So I'm looking through all of these different prices, right? And the ones so then I went through and checked. I found the ones in the same price range, but it was like, but it's 30% off. So when I saw that it was $159, but I can get it for like $129, even though that's still in the price range I want, I'm naturally going to go for that one because I'm like, well, it's valued at more. So I'm saving more money, even though it's the same price that like I set myself as a budget. And as you were talking about retreats, when you're talking about price anchoring in the beginning, I was thinking, this is what I do for my retreats. I know what I want each person at their lowest to pay for a retreat. So like, let's say it's $500. I charge more than that, but it's an easy number. I want to make at least $500 from each person that comes to retreat. So I'm going to start there and then I'm going to price it at $575. But when they sign up, they get $50 off. Or when they refer a friend, they get, something like that. Like I'll add in little incentives. But in my mind, I have to know what I want before I start asking for it in different ways. And it's not like manipulation. It's really just showing people like, this is actually valued at $575. Me as a business owner, I need this much. And I'm willing to take that off if you will sign up early. right? So that's price anchoring. Like I know what I need, or as a consumer, I know what I want to spend, and I'm looking at how other businesses do this as well.
Some other things to consider when trying to figure out your pricing is, what are other people charging? So this gets challenging depending on where you live. We do coach some people that live in small towns, and so there's less competition. There's less other businesses to compare to, which honestly is a great, I want to say problem. It's a great thing to have, because if you're the only game in town, you can't literally charge whatever you want, but you have a lot more room because, like, hey, if you want yoga, I'm it. Or you got to drive, a lot more time to get there. And I think you had mentioned that on one of the other ones, right?
Yeah, that I mean, that was my story when I moved here. So in Tulsa, like I was a little fish in a big pond, but when I came here, it was me. And they had no fitness, no yoga, no anything. So I went to the towns around me and I took some classes out there. And I'm like, people are driving to these places. So I looked at what they were charging and I priced just slightly under for a while. And then realized, like, once I started building my following here and I got a good core group of people, I'm like, I'm now saving these people money and time from driving, all the way over here, 40 minutes away. And so then I not only matched it, but I went a little bit above it by a dollar. So I realized in that moment that like they would pay me a dollar to save that time and gas, right? So I moved my anchor up quite a bit from the time I started to where I am now. But that was a moment for me to kind of work through.
Yeah. And so the two things I want to mention here in this section is, one, compared to the other, what else? What are the other alternatives? What are the other options? So if you're in a larger town and there is other yoga, what are they charging? Like, what are their drop-in rates? I like to use that drop-in number as just a great anchor to then pick your drop-in. And then from there, you can just price it, however you want to. But it's nice to have that comparison. And someplace, again, this common thing that comes up is, well, there's no other Christian yoga. There's secular yoga, but there's no other Christian yoga. And so sometimes they'll even discount from there, like, well, there's a regular studio down the road and they charge this. And so I'm the only faith-based, so I'm going to charge less. Like, no, you are offering something even more valuable because there is no other faith-based or Christian-based yoga around. So the second part of this conversation is, you are providing a valuable service and you need to make sure you're charging appropriately for the value that you're offering. And even when you're starting out, in the evolution of pricing, there's like stair steps. You start, a lot of people will start just donation based, and that's totally fine. At some point, you probably should start charging. And then over time, you get more experience and then you start charging more and make it, you just stair step up. The rate that you charge, though, needs to match your experience level and really like the value of the offering that you have. Because if you're brand new, you're probably not that good. And it's going to take some reps to build the confidence and to get to the point where you're ready to charge like that amount. So like if you're brand new and the studio down the road charges $15 for a drop-in, you probably can't also charge 15, but you could probably charge 10 or maybe like 8, 5. I mean, to me, $5 is just way too low, but you could kind of come down somewhere in the middle to start. And then over time, as your skill and your experience builds, then your price can also build as well.
Yeah. And especially starting out as a new teacher. So mine were $7 when I first started teaching on my own out here by myself in the middle of nowhere. They were $7. So started there. And then I built some class passes that made them $5 if they bought 10 or whatever it was. So I was just teaching whenever I could, as much as I could for that $7 rate. But that's not sustainable because at some point, I don't want to teach 10 classes a week or 8 classes a week. I want to teach less classes. That means I need to charge more. But it helped me build confidence because I now have no problem charging $15 or $100 for a private session or $675 for a yoga retreat because I know what I'm doing now. I didn't then. And through that, I was able to build that confidence. And I think if I had tried to start out and just match like what all my friends were doing that have been teaching forever and all of that, and I'd skipped kind of that middle, like that evolution of it, I think that would have translated in my communication and my classes. And I think people subconsciously would have just picked up on that. I think I would have just maybe not grown as much as I could. So I think there is something to like just start charging something. But like what we want to teach you is kind of to identify like when it's time to start charging more, teaching less, which is going to put more demand on you, like more of a, it's going to put you in higher demand, less demand on your body, but higher demand. Now you can charge more because you're only teaching 2 times a week now and not 6. There's a whole psychology behind that. But I think what many of us, especially starting out, or we've been kind of just doing the same thing for whatever pennies we can get, are kind of like, how do I know when it's time to do the next thing, take the next step into really making some money with this thing? Like, or at least making it worth my time. So if this isn't your full-time thing like it is mine, then like what would make it worth your time? So that's what I think is really important here too to look at. Because that
Yeah.
time will come. Like there will come a time where you're like, is this still worth it? And then what do you do from that point? Right?
Yeah. So that I think it's a good segue into the next section is what are some indications that it's time to raise your rates?
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I am disappointed with like what's coming in, so like if we're talking about donation based, like going from donation based to actually charging actual dollars for people to come, like they can't come without charging. You know what I mean? Like it's when I'm looking at like what I'm actually making and feeling that sense of disappointment, like, or when I feel like I need more predictable income. So if I launch a series and I know that my anchor prices with this many people are going to get me this much money for these set of classes, 4 classes or whatever, that's predictable. Like I know I'm going to at least bring in $500, right? So like that's predictable. So it's not necessarily consistent. I mean, it is now because I launch series all the time. But so those are 2 kind of indicators for me is like when I kind of start finding myself feeling disappointed by what I am making, which is a valid feeling. Like it's okay to feel disappointed by what you're making or not making, or kind of asking myself the question, like, is this even still worth it? Because it's now taxing my energy, my time, and even like my self-esteem. Like I'm like, these people are coming, I'm not really getting paid. Like, do they even find it valuable? You know what I mean? Like, so those are some indicators for me when it's like, okay, it's time to evaluate what I'm charging for my output. I want to make sure that I'm getting back a compensation for that.
Yeah. A key thing I wanted to highlight was when you said, like, this just doesn't feel worth it anymore. If you ever catch yourself thinking that, one, there's no shame or guilt with that.
Yeah.
That's a natural part of your pricing evolution. You're going to hit a point where, like, this just doesn't feel worth it. Like, all the energy, all the time, all the headaches that I deal with, which, I mean, let's be real, like, you're dealing with people. It's not always peaches and cream. It's not always unicorns and rainbows, right? Like, there's some annoyances and there's some frustrations and there's work involved. And at some point, you'll probably hit a point where you'll hear that voice saying like, "Oh, this just doesn't feel worth it."
Is it worth it? Yeah. And I think, even just hearing, like we were talking before, like if people even just hear like that I've had that, and can I just have like a hot moment, like a humble, honest, open and transparent moment. That's where I'm at in my actual business right now. And Nick and I have had several conversations about this of like, is what I'm doing right now sustainable? If I didn't change anything in 5 years, would it be worth it? And my answer is no. Like, does that mean I don't love what I'm doing? Does that mean I don't love my students and my teachers? It just means something needs to be reevaluated for me to get compensated for the work that I'm doing. So this is on a leadership level. It's not necessarily, or a business level. It's not necessarily teaching yoga classes, but I'm having that same conversation with myself. And it's not a bad question to ask. It's an honest question. And if we're being real, like kind of side skirting a little bit here, like most of us don't feel safe enough to be honest with ourselves. And I'm asking this question, like, is this worth it? I'm not saying are they worth it, because they're absolutely worth the world, right? Like that's why I do what I do and I love what I do. But is this worth my energy that's so finite, my time that's so like I can't get more time. I can get more money, I can get more clients, I can do all the things. And it just makes me have to reevaluate the way I'm leaning into this part of my business, right? And so that's just kind of like a real time situation, kind of transparent with you guys, but it's an
Yeah.
honest question that's okay to ask yourself.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we're afraid of the answer, and
Mm.
whether it's just because we feel guilty around, I mean, because we probably know the answer. And maybe it's a guilt thing of like, man, like God, I'm doing what God called me to do, but I'm unhappy about it. Like, it's okay to be unhappy or to not feel amazingly fulfilled doing something you know God has called you to do, that's actually pretty normal and that happens. And that's not an indication that you're in the wrong. I want you to hear that. It's not an indication that what you're doing is like you didn't miss the mark. I mean, maybe you might have, but that doesn't mean you missed the mark. I want to say it that way. It just probably means something needs to change about the way you're doing it.
Well, and it's just like any other relationship in life, right? Like I love my spouse, but in different seasons, I have to show up differently. We have to change things. We have to create new systems and habits and routines and things like that. We have to heal from some stuff. And so for me, as you were talking, I'm like, but I'm not unfulfilled. Now I have taught classes and I'm like, this, I'm teaching because I need money. Like, let's just be real. Like I'm broke and I need some money. But this specific scenario is actually kind of the opposite. Like I loved it so much. And it's literally, I'm sitting in a manifestation of what I believe God called me to do years ago. Like I'm sitting in it and there's just some questions that need to be answered. And so instead of me saying, is this worth it? Yes or no? What I'm trying to reframe myself to say is because I don't want, because I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. My question is, how can I make it worth it? Like, how can I make this work? Because I love it so much. Everyone's thriving, our students, our teachers, myself, other than the tax that it puts on me as the business owner playing multiple roles. And I know Nick, you can relate to this even more than I can because this is new for me. Like I'm not used to being here. And I think everybody should be here at some point. But I think that my question is like, how can I make it work? And so maybe and that's where you're at right now with your classes is you're saying, I love teaching. This is a perfect schedule. I love my students. I love this type of class, but I just need to make more money. How can I make it work? And it's going to give your brain some time to like figure it out, right? Like instead of it just being like, is it worth it? Or should I stop doing this? Yes or no? And so I think those are some, as you're having these conversations, or maybe God's kind of nudging you saying, like, hey, I've got some other stuff here for you to learn or to move into or to move out of. That's just kind of a inside of my brain in this time of a recording.
Yeah. And that a couple things I want to highlight. I don't want to forget this one thing is that there are a few different levers you can pull when you're trying to like maximize your profit or the money that you're making. So don't let me forget that levers. But I want to touch on a few other indications that it might be time to raise your rates. Like if your costs and expenses have gone up, like let's be real, ever since COVID, inflation has hit, stuff is just more expensive. And if you haven't bumped your rates in a while, you're probably not reflecting the change in expenses. Or like going from a space where you had free use of a space and now you have to like pay to rent a space, that is a good time to raise rates. Or if you're hiring help or you're adding on like software tools or things, I mean, anything you're adding to your business that increases the value because you've upgraded a space, because you've upgraded the experience, because even the experience off the mat, like making it easier to pay and sign up, like all of these things, you're making the experience better. Just whatever it is, if your expenses and costs have gone up, your rates need to go up. And that's just normal business. And then I think you hinted to it on one of the other episodes to like do a yearly cost increase because every year inflation goes up even like minimally like 3% a year. So give yourself a little bump each year. And then another reason you might need to bump up your rates is if you are running out of space or that you have like wait lists that are full of people. Like that's a really good indication when there's much more demand than supply. That's a good indication you need to raise your rates a little bit.
As you were listening those off, I'm like, yep, I remember when I added Acuity, that was one time that I bumped my rates up. Or when I switched to a different studio that was charging me more rent, that's when I bumped my rates up. And I think the hardest one for me on that list that you just said was giving myself a raise just because I'm giving myself a raise. But think about it, like even if you're bringing Acuity, a software to help you with scheduling and payment collection and things like that, that's like hiring somebody. So if you were growing your team and it's now costing you X amount of money to do business, like you have to compensate for that because it'll pull from you. And that's kind of where I find myself in this moment is like, I have added all these things to make it great for my students and my teachers, but I'm the one paying for it. And it's becoming more and more obvious that that's not going to work. So we just got to make some tweaks, which is okay.
And so the lever comment that I made, like there are different levers you can pull to generate more income. And one would be teaching more classes. Maybe you're just not teaching enough. Maybe your pricing is good. Maybe everything else is good. You just like, I could probably teach a couple more classes. That's one lever you can do. Just increasing your pricing, which that's the focus of this episode. Also, maybe teaching less. So is that counterintuitive? Like, yeah, kind of, but there's situations where you weren't teaching enough. There are situations where you're teaching too much and the supply and demand thing is off. We do plan on doing an episode in the future about how to get your attendance up. So usually that's a really good indication that you're teaching too many classes if your attendance is low. Now, if you're teaching few classes and your attendance is low, that's a different problem. You probably need to spend some more time leveling up your experience, or there could be a number of factors there. That episode, I think we'll address that in that one as well. So by scaling back some classes, you might get more people in them paying the rate that you're charging, and then you might make more money. And then also, I think changing up the offerings. So the previous episode we did, that Kristen did, going over those 10 different types of offerings, like that can be a great way just to offer some different types of things that can help increase revenue. And then doing more marketing. So doing more outreach and posting and even doing ad. Like there's some stuff you can do, some levers you can pull with marketing. But for the rest of this episode, we're going to focus on pricing.
So if you guys are listening to these in like chronological order, this is the third part of kind of this money discussion that we've brought to you. And you're like, just tell me what to charge. I'm not going to tell you what to charge, but I can tell you how I think while I'm deciding what I charge. And hopefully you can make that and adapt that to what you're doing. But I want to just break down a little bit of kind of what we talked about in the past episode about the different types of offerings. We won't go through all of them, but just kind of how my mind works, right? Like, don't teach me what you do, teach me how you think type thing. That's how I want you to feel here. So you can just kind of understand, and then you can plug in your own numbers for what you need, what you want. So we're just going to talk about different pricing strategies. I think it's important first to kind of, like Nick was talking about, that anchor price. What do you want that to be? So I have a number in mind that when I'm teaching a class, or let's say I'm teaching a series of 4 classes, I know what I want to make per class. So you decide what that number is, and that's going to kind of help you start this process. So let's use $100 just because it's easy math. So that way, if we come through some of these, we just need some numbers to work from. Let's say if you're doing a 4-part series, you want to make $400 after you've paid bills. Okay. So after you've paid rent, after you bought your oils or whatever else you need, you get to take home $400 for that, which is 100% doable, you guys. If you're listening to this, you're like, wow, $100 an hour. I promise you, if you've listened to more than like 4 of these episodes, like I have taught you how to do that. So it's 100% doable. So kind of just be really honest with yourself. Nick says it's the race to real. What do I want? What do I want that kind of like, if I were paying myself by the hour, what I want? So let's say it's $100 or per class or per, we're going to talk about drop-ins and things like that. So
this is really important for a couple of reasons. And you'll want to come up with an hourly rate because that will help you as you look to grow your team and expand your business, and keep all this stuff in mind, that just because you're not there yet, if you're not there yet, if you're kind of early in your journey and the thought of hiring help just sounds so far-fetched, at some point, as long as you don't quit and that's where you want to go, you'll get there eventually. So some of this is just keep this in mind for the future. Some of you are there. Some of you already have help, or you're ready to like, I can't continue to do everything. I need help. As you're working to build a team and grow a team and create an actual business, not just create a job for yourself, then that's where this stuff matters. You'll find yourself doing tasks that someone else can do at a lower rate. And so knowing what your rate is can help give you that number. So there's a book that I recommend all the time called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. And I'll link to that in the show notes. Even if feel like you're not there, read this book. So I had my brother read this. He's a realtor and he started his own real estate brokerage. And I had him read it. And he said, man, I mean, it was great for that specific purpose, but I felt like it was just like an awesome book about business in general. So I highly recommend that book. Like, buy it. Okay. It's cheap. It'll help. Buy it. But in that, he has a formula for figuring out like, what is your hourly rate? And then a certain formula for what is your buyback hourly rate. So if you're doing a task, let's say you're doing bookkeeping, that buyback rate for you is $10. Can you hire a bookkeeper to do that for $10 an hour? The answer is yes. I have a overseas Filipino bookkeeper who does mine. I think I pay him like $5 an hour. Done. Right? Like there's a lot of help you can get for cheap if there's some stuff you can offload. So it's important to have this number that as you start to grow in your business level and need to offload some things, like you can have that number in place. And this, Kristen, this is where you need to start going through this exercise because you're doing things that someone at a lower hourly rate can handle. So having that hourly rate is important. I would say also when it comes to teaching, so this is specifically for teaching classes, you should have a per class rate that like a target per class rate. And this will help you in every pricing, every kind of offering you're doing to look at, I want to make $100 per class. Great. Like that's a really easy, it's not necessarily easy to hit. That's a great target. It's an easy way to figure out what you should charge. That's what I was trying to say. So the series option. Sometimes it gets a little messy if you're like, well, how many classes am I teaching? What total? But if you want to get to that per class rate, you'll know I want to make $100 per class. I'm teaching this many classes. It just helps do all the math. Same thing for like drop-in classes. I want to try to make $100 per class. And if my drop-in rate is this, I need this many students. And so you can kind of work back on the math based on how many people you need in the class at that rate, or based on how many people typically show up, what you need to be charging to hit that rate. So it's just a great number to have to then influence pricing everything else. If you're doing a pop-up class, if you're doing a series, if you're doing a workshop, like anything you're doing, it really helps give you that frame of mind. So based on what I want to make per class and how many classes there are and all these factors, this is what I need to charge. So that's why this number I feel is really important to have. Hey friend, if you're finding this helpful, can you do me a favor and hit that like button? That really does help us. It lets YouTube know that this is valuable and helpful. And it just lets us know that we're on the right track and that we're providing valuable and helpful content. Thanks.
So let's go through those. We've gone through each of these types of classes in previous episodes. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on like what the actual class is, but I think this is how I would price them, or how I do and have priced them. So let's start with like your basic membership model, or your basic, like I just teach every Tuesday at 9 a.m. So there's going to be different options for that Tuesday 9 a.m. class. They can either pay a membership. So if you're teaching every Tuesday, a membership could look like $30 a month and you have access to all of the Tuesdays every month. Okay. Or pay for a quarter at a time since it's only one class. So you're giving them access to that class or the classes that you teach ongoing. Like it's not a series, it's not a pop-up, it's just a class you teach all the time. So you can offer a membership, and that's going to be your most cost effective for them, for the student. And that is a consistent income for you. If I could recommend anything to you from my own story, is make memberships auto draft. Like don't chase them down every month looking for that membership. Don't even just sending out an email to remind them can be daunting, but make that, if they want, the $89 instead of the $110 that your normal classes cost for just a month. Like if I just want to buy a month to come to your classes and it's $110, but it's $89 for a membership on auto draft. I'm like, sign me up for that. Like I want to save $20 a month, right? Give them some little incentive, but do what you can to make those as automated as possible. The next option for those types of classes would be like your class passes or your punch cards. So this is going to give them like a slight decrease in their classes. So if your classes are $10, that's your drop-in rate. Make your class passes like 10 classes for $80. So now they're saving $20. There is some kind of deadline for them to use that, but they can drop into any classes over the next, let's say 45 to 60 days. I would say keep it as low as you can get away with for class passes. And this is actually something I've been experimenting with, is offering class passes within my series. So if I do an 8-part series, which I do because I have the retention to do that now for my hot yoga classes, I'll offer a 5-class pass. And so someone who's like, I can't make all of them and it's only good during that series. But that's another conversation for another day. So that's your class pass option. And then of course your drop-in. This is just like, hey, they're coming in one time and that's going to be your most expensive per class. But this is a way for them to try it out. Maybe they can only come once or twice a month. So it doesn't make sense for them to buy 10 classes or a whole membership, right? but you are going to be making the most on those drop-ins. They're just the least consistent. So I usually build all of my offerings. Again, I run a pretty much full on series model. My personal offerings are all series. And then if I have space left in the class, that's when I open up drop-ins. I don't offer drop-ins all the time unless I have space for them. So those are also not guaranteed for them in my classes.
Yeah, and I think the important consideration here again is having your drop-in rate as like your anchor point. That once you figure out what is it worth it for me to teach drop-ins, or like what does that rate need to be, that informs how you price all the other stuff so that you have some kind of anchor in comparison. So figure out that drop-in rate. And if you're not sure what to charge, again, look at what others are doing just to get kind of an idea. And then based on your abilities, the experience you create, charge accordingly.
And shameless plug here, you guys, this is what we do is we sit down with teachers just like you. Like we offer single strategy sessions. So if you come and say, "Hey, here's where I'm at, here's what other people charge, help me plug these numbers in for my situation," shoot us an email and we'd love to get that scheduled with you, because this is a great opportunity to have somebody else come in and say, "Here's what I see, here's what makes sense," right? So moving on. The next pricing option that we're going to talk about is your series. So again, this is the model that I run. I would say like 90% of my offerings are run on the series basis. And that's not just yoga, that's anything else I do is done on a series basis. So this is where they pay for the whole series, 4 to 6 weeks. I would say if you're just starting out or you haven't done a series before, that sweet spot is 4, because people start dropping off at 3 weeks no matter what. Unless you have a solid, like they are ride or dies, don't go over 4 weeks for a while. Okay. I know it's a pain and you have to relaunch it and you have to I get it. I understand. And do it long enough and then they will demand that you offer more. Right. And then they start paying less because now they're buying 6 classes or 6-week series. So it's going to be less for them, more for you, less work for you. So this is where you charge that set amount. So again, let's say that you charge $100 for a 4-week series. Well, I don't know if that makes sense. Well, you want it to make sense with your drop-in rates. So let me just use mine for an example. For a 6-week hot yoga series, it's $85. My drop-ins are $18. I believe that 85 divided by 6, I think, if I remember it from brain, it makes like 14 or $14.50, right? Nick can probably do that math a lot faster than I can. But when they buy the whole series, it's essentially just a class pack they're buying that ends, right? For these 8 classes. They are saving money. I'm getting paid whether they show up or not. It's predictable. And it just lets me know like how much space I have. So I try to sell 10 series for, let's say, my hot yoga classes. I sell 10 and I know that I can fit about 3 more people in that class. So now I've got space for my $18 drop-ins, which almost always sell out every class. So I'm now making that extra, but those people are just coming to try, test the waters, come in with a friend. You know what I mean? Like it's low commitment for them, but I just made whatever 18 times 3 is, like 36 plus 18. What's that? Math. I don't do math, guys. It's hard. I need my calculator. So Nick, do you have any thoughts on series? I know we've done so much work on series, so I don't want to get into like series, what they actually are, but just kind of like on the pricing side of that, like
I've actually created a pricing calculator, and it's in our series workshop that we teach. So if you're interested at all in offering series, or maybe you do it but you don't do it well, or you need help doing it better, we actually have a workshop where we teach you everything you need to know about offering series. And in that is a calculator that you essentially just put in, here's what I want to make per class. And here are some of my expenses, like here's rent or here's whatever. Like you plug in your numbers, it tells you what to charge.
that's pretty awesome. I didn't know you made that. That's so cool.
So if you're interested in that, go to christiansdoyoga.com/series, and it'll redirect you to a page where you can buy that workshop, and then you'll get the calculator, which honestly, it works for other than series. It works for anything. You just put this many classes and here's all my costs. What should I charge?
That's pretty awesome. And this is my biggest tip to you guys, especially if you're just getting started or you really just want to make more money. This is the one. Of all the ones we're about to talk about, series is the way to go to do that. Just trust me on it. Do our workshop, reach out to us, whatever. Like this is the one that's going to, especially over time of doing it more often. Like this is the one. Okay, so let's talk about workshops and specialty classes. So these are going to be like, I mean, just that your workshops or your pop ups. So a workshop for me is 2 hours. And let's say it's over inversions. It's essentially like a group, like if they're like, hey, we want to learn how to do arm balances and headstands. Great. So it's kind of like a group private class situation. And we're going to go through all these things and I'm going to work, with them individually. I'll let them work together. Or if it's like a beginner's workshop, that's a good one that we do. I try to do it at least once a year, but I really would like to do it more frequently. But that's a good one because it's they get more of your attention and there is that like back and forth. It's not just like the flow of a class where it's like, hey teacher, I need to ask you something. They're getting your specialized attention. You definitely want to charge more for these. Right. So again, 2 hours, I know, like, let's say we want to make $100 after I pay rent. If my rent is $45, like we have to take that out of the top of it. What do I need to make that $100? Right. So then that tells me how many people I need in the class and maybe how to price it. So mine usually look 30-ish dollars, sometimes 25, sometimes 35, depending on what it is. And then the same for pop-ups. Like pop-ups are going to be for like your one-off things. So we have one of the gals at my studio teaches dance and she'll do like a dance fit pop-up. And it's like a party. Like it's like a 90-minute, like we get together, we dance, we do a little bit of yoga at the end, and then we have snacks at the end and just hang out and do girl time. Or like somebody else teaches like a holy experience and it's 90 minutes. It's like spa, like think spa and Jesus and yoga. Like it's like a whole situation. She does yin. So she charges, I think somewhere around like $35 to $40 a ticket for that. Right. So you're going to charge higher for those more specialized classes or specialty classes. And you should, because you're creating something for the subset of people that you wouldn't normally create. And likely they're going to be maybe a little smaller group. Whereas like for yoga, you may be able to fit like 20 people in your class. But for an arm balance workshop, having 20 people would be a little bit harder, in my opinion. So I'm going to keep that a little bit smaller, maybe like 10 people. Right. So 10 people at $35, that's $350. And I've now hit what I want to make for that class. Private sessions. Let's talk about this. I feel like this comes up quite a bit in like different yoga teacher groups that I'm in. And by the way, if you guys aren't in our yoga teacher group, make sure you are. It's just our yoga teacher, Christians Do Yoga, yoga teacher community, where these questions, like people say, how much do you charge for private lessons? For me, my private session rate is the highest thing I charge because it's the thing I want to do the least. I don't enjoy. Now, if I have one of my regular students say, hey, can I hire you for like 4 private sessions while I'm working on learning this arm balance? I've had people do that and that's totally fine. But if someone just calls me and says, can you do recurring like private sessions? I probably am going to say no, or I'm going to charge such a large amount that it has to be worth the unfulfillment that I feel teaching it. Does that make sense? So it becomes just a job at that point. So deciding, and I feel like, again, this is going to be my higher rates. This is going to be also my anchor price for my brides or small groups of people that are like, what do you charge for a private session just once? So let's say a bride calls me and says, hey, I want you to come on my wedding day and do your yoga spa. What would that charge me? And I always say like, it's going to cost me $150 to get there. And if there's travel, it's going to be, another $25, depending on what it is. Like I'll give them a travel fee. And then if they need any extra things, like if they want me to make them swag bags or whatever, then I just keep going up from there with my anchor price. Like just to get me to show up, it's going to be $150 for a 1-hour session. Right. So kind of knowing like, and that is what I charge. That's what I would charge somebody for a private session, just because it's just not something I really enjoy doing unless it's one of my existing students for a specific and short amount of time. When people are paying for your personal and private attention, because I know what I want to make per class. Remember, we talked about at the very beginning of this, like what's that number? Like, and it's not always going to be exactly. Like sometimes it's way more and sometimes way less. But like in my head, I'm unwilling to show up for less than this. It helps me behave around that. So that's kind of where I'm thinking, like, if I'm going to take my half a day away to go travel, teach these girls, which I love bridal parties, by the way. Like I love doing bridal, but I also am a hairdresser and makeup art. Like I love just being with the bride on her day, but usually that's a group situation too. So That's just another example of knowing like, hey, I want to make at least this. And then I move from there. Like, but if I have to bring props, it's going to be there or whatever. Like, you guys can add on your own stuff.
My tip with that is to lead in with having like 2 packages and start with the more expensive one.
That's good.
So what you could say is in the bride situation is like, well, I offer a couple different packages. Now, one is like, I want the top of the top, the best experience. I come in with this and that and this, and we do this and it's this, and that is this rate. Now, some people, they just kind of want me to come in and just do the basics and whatever. And it's still a great experience. We still do this, this, and that is this rate. And now they've got 2 things to compare, like, because some brides are like, it's my day. I'm a princess. I want whatever. And like, great. And most other people are like, that's not really for me. I just want this. Some people even say have 3. I would never have more than 3 because then our brains start to get decision fatigue. The common wisdom here is that you want to price things to where if you have 3, your middle package is like, this is the one I want them to buy. So I price a higher one that like, it's still worth it to me and I'll do it at that rate. I don't love always doing that. Some people are going to buy it and I'm going to price it to where it's worth it for me to do that. Most people are going to see that and go, oh, okay, I want the middle one or I want the lower one, which having the 3, the lower one is like, it's still priced to where it's worth it. And the middle one, though, is kind of like the best of both worlds. And like, that's the one I want them to pick. In this case, I don't think you need 3 packages for a bridal thing, but to just say
No,
like, it's like my all out amazing thing is this. But if you just want kind of a basic and it's still amazing, whatever, it's this, which one do you prefer?
yeah, I think that's good. And when I've done this with private sessions before, something I would say is like, it's $150 for a single session. But if you do 4 sessions, it's 100 or 125. And if you do 8 sessions, and you can use them weekly or you can use them twice a week, however you want to use your 4 sessions, like you're buying these. If you do 8 sessions, then it's $85 per session. Of course, I have that whole math number pulled out for them. And if you want to bring friends with you and they just want to reimburse you for this, like you guys are welcome to do that. But you're like, I make them pay me up front. And that way, and again, so I let them invite their friends with that. That just side note, if y'all aren't marketing to brides, unless you just don't want to do weddings, it is a fantastic place to market. Like they love this wedding morning yoga, like give them an imagery of like what it's going to feel like before you start your busy day, all the things. And then, yeah, I mean, like you can even use we have the yoga spa that you guys can learn to teach. And it's a wonderful service to provide them. And it's great money. So just a little side note on that. The next one I want to talk about is corporate classes. And I've done these a couple different ways. I'll just share how I did it. And Nick might have another idea since you actually come from corporate, but I have done it where they just pay me the same amount every week. So for a while I was going and I did charge for travel because it was about a 35-minute drive for me one way and I was going twice a week. So I would go and they paid me X amount per class and then my travel fee, but that just came through every single week that I taught. And that was wonderful. And that's actually was a very constant source of income while I was building my own thing here. So it was a great, and the girl that reached out to me was like, "Hey, you don't know me. We used to go to church together, and I follow you on social media, and I see that you teach yoga and Cushing. That's kind of close to us. So would you be interested in this?" Because she was over like in the wellness whatever. And so I just said, "Here's what it costs to get me there." And I need this much for a travel fee. So it'll be this much per week. And she just had it on like an auto situation. So every Friday I got paid the same amount. Now I've done it another way where the business owner said, "Hey, I really want to offer this to my employees. I'm not sure how it's going to go over." Like this other place had like a gym that people use and they were bringing in teachers to teach certain classes at lunchtime. This one was like, "Let me just pay you for the quarter." And I was like, heck yeah. Like it was a big lump sum all at once. Now I would show up sometimes and there wouldn't be anybody there, but I already got paid for it. So you could do that one of 2 ways and just say, "Hey, it's this much per week for these classes. That includes my travel fees. And if you have to bring props or anything like that, you can kind of include some of that like it's a convenience to them, like you're bringing your stuff." Or you can say, "I charge by the quarter. It's going to be $1,500 for each quarter or whatever your prices are. Go back to your anchor price. And you just pay that at the first of every quarter. I'll show up on Wednesdays from 11 to 11:45 and that'll be that." So those are the ways I have done corporate offerings. Nick, do you have anything to add to that as a corporate guy?
Just to reiterate that businesses want their people to be healthy, and because when they're sick, they're not working and they're losing production time, and they often have to still pay them when they're sick, with sick time. So they want their people to be healthy, and so they do invest money into helping them be healthy. So depending on the size, you could go to LinkedIn, find businesses in your area, and on LinkedIn you can find people who work at a company and even like job titles and stuff. So if you can find someone in HR, what I would recommend, if this sounds interesting to you, because if it were me, if I were a teacher, like this is definitely something I would pursue, at least for a stretch, for all the reasons that you mentioned, having predictable income. It would give you reps in a very low key environment. A great way to practice and just get better as a teacher. You could come up with a reach out strategy to say, it could be just a template you create for, hey, so and so. I'd have to think about this is just off the cuff. I'd have to think about how I would word it, but just come up with an email or a text that just spells out like why yoga. Like, hey, there's something that I offer businesses and I have a little bit of availability. You want to make it kind of seem like I can only take on one or two of these, which is probably true. Just to put a little bit of scarcity, a good kind of scarcity around it, and say, hey, I have a little bit of flexibility in my schedule to offer corporate sessions to help your people be healthy, blah, blah, blah. All the benefits of yoga. Like, do you find that your people, or if your people could use better flexibility, and people that off, you can even include some stats. People who have desk jobs often suffer from boom, 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 like inflexibility and pain in their shoulders and joints and like all this stuff that yoga helps with. Then you can flip it and say, and did you know that yoga actually helps with bum, 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 bum. So little marketing tip there.
Yeah.
Come up with just a boilerplate thing that you can send to businesses in your city. And then you can just try to find the right person, get their email address, or just message them through LinkedIn and go from there. I mean, send out 10, you might get one reply. And this is just kind of a numbers game. Send out 100, and then you might get a certain amount reply. You might get, a certain amount of people from there sign up. But if one of these generates, I don't know what, like, give me a number, like 1,000 a month or like what?
I'm trying to think what my like if I can think of the price. I think I was getting paid like $270 per week. So whatever that costs. So yeah, like $1,000 a month. And that was just for me to go out there twice a week.
Yeah. So depending on what it is and the number of times, like if you could generate that much predictable a month, like is it worth being uncomfortable a little bit, spending some time with this message, sending it out? Like totally. Like send it out to a bunch of people.
Like you were saying earlier, just have your different options. Hey, if you want me to come once a week, I can stay and teach 2 back-to-back classes. That's what I did because there were 2 different lunch times at their work. It's this much, or just per week. Like I can come once a week for this much per month. Or if you want to do it all at the quarter, it's this much. Like give them your package options and have those ready. So I mean, those 2 things you may not have even thought about having if you're looking to make more money, your bridal sessions and your corporate sessions. Like you may not have even thought of those things until listening to this podcast. And now you have a little bit of language to wrap around it to do.
So to wrap this up, I have some final thoughts to share. One is just make sure you factor in your other expenses like rent, if you're renting and have to pay utilities, any equipment or supplies. Like you got to think about this stuff, what we would call overhead. Like, what does it cost, whether I'm teaching 1 class or 20 classes? You're going to have some fixed costs, potentially, things that just happen no matter what. And then you're going to have some variable costs, which means it's like per class, you have this cost. So the more classes you teach, the higher that expense is going to be. So just make sure you're factoring those in when you're doing this. Because if you don't, and you have rent or you have these other things, it's going to eat away at the money that you thought you were going to pay yourself. And then just ensure that your pricing covers that and provides you some kind of reasonable profit margin so that you are still making money on what you're offering. And also consider taxes. As we're recording this, it's tax season. A lot of people don't think about taxes. Make sure that one, you're setting aside money for taxes and that you're factoring that into what you're charging. Because if you want to make $100 per class, newsflash, you're not actually making $100 per class. A certain percentage of that is going to go to the government. So make sure that you're charging appropriately and making sure that you're setting aside money for taxes. What I do personally, just a side note, is I just have a certain percent of every dollar that comes in, this much I move into this other savings account. So when I do my quarterly estimated taxes, I have money to then pay that. So little pro tip there. The next one is really just be okay with changing your pricing. A lot of people get uncomfortable with it. Once they've charged a certain rate, they feel really uneasy about increasing the rate. They come up with all these what ifs, like, oh, what if I raise the rate and people stop coming? Or what if I raise the rate and just people can't afford it, or they, you know, whatever. Like, yeah, that's probably gonna happen. Most of the time when we coach people or when Kristen's done it, we increase rates. There are some people that's like, you know what, I just can't do that. Or maybe they were kind of on the fence anyway, and that was just kind of the last thing to push them over the edge. Like, you know what, I'm not coming enough, or whatever the reason is, I'm out. And yeah, in the short term, that can hurt a little bit, but that's just part of business. And what that does is that makes space for people who will pay the new rate. And that price, in the end, you will make more money. So if you have more people paying a lower amount, or if you have slightly fewer people paying a bigger amount, you're going to still come out ahead, and you're making room for new people coming in. And also just make sure that you're charging appropriately for the value that you create. A lot of us kind of feel uneasy, and especially early on in your career, you feel like maybe you're not worth, struggling with some of that worth stuff. And we covered some of that in episode 27. So make sure you listen to that one if you haven't already. But you need to price things appropriately. And when you're creating a lot of value for these people, you should charge for it. The next one is make sure what you're charging just makes sense. And again, it all comes back to that anchor price of your drop-in rate. And now when you're comparing, or when they're comparing in their minds, the punch cards or the membership or series, like whatever it is that you're offering, make sure that stuff is priced in a way that they're getting a better deal when they buy the package option. And that's something we do even in our coaching, where when someone buys our biggest coaching package, when we factor in what is that effective rate per session, like that's where we start with our pricing. And then once we know that, let's say that's for 8 coaching sessions. Now we come up with a 3 coaching session option. So people who maybe aren't ready for the big one, but they want to do 3 calls with us. Now that per session cost will be a little bit more than that. And then if someone just wants 1 session, then it's a little bit more per session for that one. The mistake that I see some people make is that they start at that 1 class option and price it there, like, this is what I want to make per class. Then when they go to do the class pass or punch card or whatever, they start making package options. You have to discount that. Otherwise, what's the point of buying a package? Now they're discounting and they're making less money than they wanted to make per session. So start at the package that you have that offers the most classes so that they're getting the best deal. Price that at the money that you want to make, and then price the other things accordingly upstream from that. And then the final thought, that sounds funny, is to periodically, and maybe quarterly makes the most sense, set aside time to evaluate all this stuff. Evaluate how things are going. Evaluate how much money is coming in. Evaluate your effectively hourly rate. Evaluate what it is that you want, and are things in line with what you want. And it's okay for your wants and your needs and your desires to change, or even as your life changes. Maybe at some point you had a baby and like your personal expenses are higher, or you've gotten more experience and now you're providing more value. Just whatever it is, you need to set aside time periodically to just evaluate things. Even evaluate, like, how are classes going? How is attendance? Are the classes making enough money, per class or whatever? But go through that. And if the answer is no for any of those, all right, let's do something about it. Now you can evaluate what about this particular offering isn't making sense anymore. I think I want to do another episode just on that process of evaluating, like, hey, something's not going well. Like, what's the thought process in that? So if you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe, catch the future episodes that are coming. But there is a process to go through. Hey, this thing is not doing well. I wonder why, because it could be a combination of things. Could be, well, I don't want to go into it now. Let's not spoil it. But there is a process that we go through when we're evaluating that with students or clients, or even with Kristen stuff.
Man, that's some good stuff. And I love this whole podcast. Really, this whole 3-part series is based off the questions that you guys ask us, or some of the things that I've asked myself that maybe I've never said out loud before, like, is it okay to be disappointed with the amount of money I'm making? So I hope that you found just a sliver of something in this that gives you a little bit of hope, a little bit of courage to take your next step. And we're always here for you guys. Shoot us emails, find us on the socials, do all the things. And we're always happy to kind of help you take your next steps to empower you to do the work that you love, make money doing it, and still be able to live your life.
Well, friend, if you did find that helpful, please hit that like button. Let us know that was helpful. And would you consider sharing it with another teacher friend who you think would find this helpful? That would really mean a lot to us. That's really the best way you can support us. We don't run ads or anything like that. We just want to help people. And by you sharing it, liking it, subscribing, all that stuff, like that helps us continue. That helps bring this to new people. And we just love being able to help people and make a difference. So appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in. So as we said in this episode, this is part 3 of a series we were doing on money. If you missed the other 2, you can click them here. I'll put them on the screen. So click the one you didn't watch. Or if you didn't watch either of them, watch both of them. Let's start with the first one.